Hello and welcome to Amazing Meetings, the gathering place for those that want to make a difference in the room. My name is Loui, all the way from South Africa.
And my name is Bartosz, all the way from Poland. Welcome to the show.
Bartosz, I'm very excited. We actually got some feedback on our first two podcasts that we did, and we had a question. And you were very excited to share the question with us today. So today we don't have someone that we're interviewing, but we've done some research and we're actually ready to answer one of the questions from one of our listeners. So over to you. Who spoke to us and what do they want to know?
Yes, well, today we celebrated two things. Well, the first thing we celebrated was 100 listeners actually taking the time of their busy schedules to enjoy our show. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to all of you people out there. I know we're not a big show, we're not a massive show. I like to call us a boutique show for coaches, facilitators, and managers. So thank you so much for staying with us. All we do for you. And second big thank you to Michael, who's a coach based in Berlin, and he dropped us a question into our question box. So Michael says, "Hi, I'm a business coach. I was invited to facilitate a training session for the first time. I am interested in hearing about some of the tools and tricks you guys use that I might be able to incorporate in my next sessions." It sounds a little bit like Michael was asked to step into someone else's shoes, just like Mark, who shared his story with us in our previous episode, right, Loui?
Yeah. I think that's how many of us actually get into training for the first time. It's not like, in 6 months you will be asked. It's like, listen, someone cancelled.
Yes.
Here's the slides, here's the content. You're the specialist, apparently, or, you like speaking more than most people. So welcome, you're taking the session tomorrow afternoon. And, and there we go.
It's uncanny how often it happens this way. So we're here to help with our very first special episode, where it's just the two of us talking about the tools of the trade.
So what I've come across is that many times when we, as a professional speaker, one of the main mindsets that I needed to change was going from a point of being in front of our speaker and just kind of delivering what I've prepared to an audience of 100 to 500 or whatever the case might be. And the only feedback you get is there's a laugh line and they're laughing,
Yeah.
but there's not actually a tangible facilitation happening. And I think when we talk about facilitation, it's more about inviting and getting the audience or the participants involved in the learning, which is a completely different approach than saying, okay, here I am, 45 minutes, let me disperse onto you the information and knowledge that I have.
Right.
Versus when we talk about facilitation, it's really about getting the guys involved in the learning, and I think some of the tricks and the tools that we've come across and discussed is really how to facilitate that involvement to the point of better learning.
Well, that is a very good start, I think, into this discussion, to really break it down into the context that you need to operate in. I don't think this is only for Michael, but it's for most of us out there who need to stand in front of the room and truly understand what sort of a dynamic they want to have between them and the audience. Well, Loui, you are an award-winning public speaker, but you're also a certified world-class facilitator. So which of these two contexts do you find more stressful?
I think on the one hand, when we talk about public speaking, there's more of a detachment. So you have your script that you've prepared, you have a lot of security within knowing where you want to go, and you're in control. There's not a lot of surprises. The bigger surprise might be, the stage is a little bit different than what you thought it would be. But you're there, you're presenting, you're doing your 45 minutes, you're saying goodbye and you go. I think the challenge comes in, specifically if we talk about facilitation, is that you don't know what's going to come.
Yeah.
Is as soon as someone picks up their hand and they ask you a question from left field and you're like, okay, I've never anticipated that question. Or, wow, that's a really interesting question. And then managing the process and not getting sidetracked or going off on a tangent and only to speak to one person during the whole conversation, but to still answer the questions, stay on track with the facilitation or the outcomes that you've agreed on, and really be the guide towards the learning outcomes. Whereas if you're a public speaker, it's like, I have the road, you invite them to go on a journey with you on the road that you've predetermined. Whereas if we facilitate, we're taking them on a journey on a road that they kind of co-create as we go along to an outcome that you kind of have in mind, that you've agreed on beforehand, and to get them there.
Right. For me, it's the opposite. Isn't that funny? Because I always found it harder to prepare to deliver, I don't know, a 45-minute presentation than to actually go with the flow with people. So I guess what Michał is fishing for in his email, in his question, is what sort of tips and tricks you can rely on. What sort of exercises you can introduce that you know very well, that you have a history with them, so you know what sort of outcomes you can rely on, and how can you apply them in a setting that is very volatile and uncertain, as you put it very nicely. Well, you go with the audience, so you never know what to expect, but still, you want to have some experiences planned that help the flow.
I think from my side, one of the activities that I've come across that I use quite often is something called the clock. So you either have photocopies of an analog clock with the arms, but it's just the round clock with the numbers, 12 all the way to 12. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of my session, it doesn't matter if we're doing conflict management or if we're doing team effectiveness, if we're doing time management, whatever the content is, if there's a group of people, one of the first activities I do is I get them to make meetings with 6 people. So if it's a group of 12 people, okay, find someone to have a meeting with at 12, at 2, at 4, at 6, and so forth. And that's the first activity. Okay, so, and you need to ensure that if I have a meeting with Bartosz at 12 o'clock, then Bartosz has to have a meeting with me. So it's that little bit of, scrambling at the beginning to really get everyone to have a booking. Now, what I use those meetings for is a point of reflection. So like, okay, guys, so we've completed this part of the content now. Quickly go to your 4 o'clock meeting, and in that point, you can insert any question. Quickly have a discussion about what you learned. Reflect on some of the challenges that is relevant to this. Or if you're doing team effectiveness, kind of know one another, but you want to kind of break down some of the barriers, you might introduce something like, okay, share your greatest humiliation, or, and this is always very necessary to qualify, or your greatest successes that you feel comfortable in sharing with the other person, from school, and the one guy's like, oh, you know what, I fell flat on my face, ha, ha, ha. And the other person is like, I'm not going to tell you my greatest, no, there's no way. So I might tell you that I got 100% in an accounting test, and for him that was great. But it starts the conversation because everybody else is doing it. It really gets them talking. And that also gives me the opportunity then to afterwards and say, okay, in this little group, what's something that stood out? In this little group, what's something that stood out? So if we want to get the audience involved, we let them talk. We let them talk to one another, because then everybody needs to come out of their shell. Everybody needs to share. And the fact that I shared it with Bartosz, if the facilitator now asks me, I've heard it in my ears, I've gone to the point of formulating my sentence, now I can share it with the person in front. And that's where a lot of interactive learning takes place. But you need to have a plan from the beginning. So you have to have your clock or your meetings or something set up, and you need to use it effectively. And many times, if you want to go off on a tangent, that's the place where they will ask a question and that you really need to manage it. So
what I need to prepare as a facilitator then are these worksheets that have a picture of a clock printed in them, correct?
Yeah.
Oh, you look like you're about to show it to me, but remember, our listeners will have to imagine that.
So on the one hand, yes, it's good if you have a photocopy of a clock, just a round circle, or you can just ask someone to go, on a piece of paper, quickly draw a circle, write the 1 to 12. So it's not necessarily that if you don't have it there, you can't use the exercise. Right. It's something you can do kind of makeshift as you go.
And the hours on the clock, do you use them in a figurative way? So let's say 9 o'clock meeting doesn't have to happen at 9 o'clock, or is it something that you just use as a way of referring back to the tool?
No. So it's not connected to the real time on the clock of the facilitation. I mean, like like a 5 o'clock. Hopefully you're never in a room at 5 o'clock or 5:30 in an afternoon. So, your 6 o'clock meeting is like, hopefully you're not there. No, it's really just a frame of reference. Like, okay, go to your 2 o'clock meeting, go to your 8 o'clock meeting. I usually do it in chronological order, but it's just a point of reference. And it's something that everyone feels comfortable with. They're like, oh, 8 o'clock, okay, this is what we're doing. It just gives them that little bit of predictability.
Well, any place where this can go wrong?
I think the biggest challenge that I've actually seen is when we have like 12 people in a room and we're like, okay, fine. So get meetings for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 o'clock. You must have, meet with 6 people and go. And the craziness is to find people that are struggling in a group, specifically if it's not an even number group, they get lost. It's like one guy that says, okay, that directive type of personality. You're my 2, you're my 4, you're my 6, you're my 8. I'm done. 2 minutes into activity, he's done. And there's this little, soft-spoken person at the back that says, I haven't got a 4 o'clock or a 8 o'clock. And to see that power dynamic come to play in the beginning of the day is actually quite interesting. So many times you give them a couple of minutes, it's chaos, people run around, you challenge them and say, don't just meet with your friends. But I mean, if you need to have 6 meetings, you don't have necessarily 6 good friends in the room. So that's already a bit challenging. But the biggest challenge that I've seen is, especially if it's a smaller group, to have everyone have 6 meetings really becomes a challenge. And sometimes as the facilitator, you just need to step in and say, okay, 4 minutes is up. Right. Who doesn't have a 2 o'clock? Great. And then you need to just kind of facilitate that a little bit to make sure that everybody has a meeting. Because the worst thing to have is go have your 2 o'clock meeting. And there's like one person kind of drifting around, feeling all rejected because he's not part of the activity anymore.
Wow. All right. Well, thanks for sharing. I think that's very useful. Would you like to hear what I have to share?
Well, let's hear what the... No, Bartosz.
Well,
so, Bartosz, so from your side, if you're doing activities, what's your go-to activity that you go like, this is my thing. If I'm running against the wall, this is my arrow that I pull.
I will start with heavy artillery, if you will.
Okay.
Right, because my background is in design thinking and agile project management. So it took me a while to figure out the perfect exercise that illustrates how important communication within the team is and how important it is to understand the group dynamics behind the process in a nutshell. Because, working in IT, you sometimes need to resort to tools that are very illustrative, but they're actually extremely easy to deliver. So I came across this tool, I think, more than 5 years ago, and it is called the Marshmallow Challenge. Have you ever heard about that, Loui?
No, I'm not going camping this weekend, so no.
No, it's not something you do when you go out camping. It's not something you do in your backyard. The Marshmallow Challenge is actually an experiment invented, or maybe I'm getting this wrong, but this is actually an experiment that was introduced by Tom Wyatt on his TED Talk. When I saw it for the first time, it really made me connect the dots. So what this experiment does is, you have 18 minutes to build a tower out of spaghetti, tape, and string with a marshmallow on the top. The twist is you have to compete with all the other teams in the room because it is a team exercise, and whoever builds the tallest freestanding tower, which means no touching, wins. And you let the group work. I'm not going to go into the detail of this because I don't want to spoil it for you, but I can assure you, every time I run it, I'm afraid someone will finally crack the system and we will not get to the sort of insights this exercise has to offer. I'm going to come back to those insights in just a moment. And every time, I'm really stressed out when I facilitate that. And I run this experiment over 100 times already, and it never fails to deliver, and it never fails to amaze. So let me tell you a little bit about how this is done. Well, what you need to prepare is an envelope, a pair of scissors, 1 meter of string, about 20 sticks of spaghetti pasta, 1 meter of tape, and the worse quality of those materials, the better. So that gives you a lot of room as a facilitator to experiment with it.
So Bartosz, this is now per team.
Per team, yeah. That's what every team gets, a mystery envelope with that. You need a timer and set it for 18 minutes and let them work with these tools to create the tallest possible tower. And what you will see unravel in front of your eyes, it's quite a delight if you understand how the group process works, how the power dynamics work within the team. And because it is a high pressure environment, because you go around asking them how they're doing, you keep comparing their towers to the other towers, etc., you will immediately see the best and the worst come out of people at the same time. It's just marvelous. But what this exercise focuses on, and the reason I'm saying my background as an agile coach and as a design thinking practitioner is important here, this exercise actually shows you that small, quick iterations and experimentation are vital to the success of a project. So that's one big takeaway. Another big takeaway is that the bigger the stakes, the bigger the failure rate, which is extraordinary and extraordinarily amazing to see that. And finally, you can see how diverse skills across the team matter. So the trick is not in the exercise itself, but in the debrief that you want to run with the team afterwards. So I usually plan it for about 45 minutes. It fits most of the contexts of modern management out there. I can guarantee you that. So, you will see if you want to focus on different characters at the table, different personas, different personalities, you'll have it. If you want to focus on process more than people, you'll have it there. And the sort of insights people have with this exercise are usually very deep.
So, practical question. How big is the team? So if we have a group of about 20 people, how big are the little builder teams that you break up to build these spaghetti towers?
I found them to be most effective at 3, but effectiveness is not what you're fishing for. You're fishing for the mess, right? You want this experience to be a little bit messy for them and a little bit uncomfortable. So the sweet spot is 4 people. But it works with 5 people as well. So for a group of 20, I would aim for 5 groups of 4 people each.
Okay. So, and again, the allocation of the groups, do you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the 2s come together, all the 3s come together? Or do you go, okay, find 3 buddies and kind of, work together?
Well, this is the funny part. It doesn't really matter because, if you want to have diverse groups, then, you'll have different results during the debrief. Well, at the end of the exercise, you're going to have different results if you have homogeneous groups, which is also a very interesting idea to unpack. So let's imagine you have 4 managers in the room and 16 employees. Now, you could actually, and both outcomes are great. I think it's good to put the managers in one group, see what happens, and then unpack this idea in front of the room, or mix them up a little bit, see how they deal with this situation again. So you're absolutely free to choose.
So question, we said that there's a competition, there's a time limit, there's like who's got the highest. Do the guys get competitive? Is there a lot of copying? What's kind of the ground rules that you put down for them to adhere to during the exercise?
Oh, the only ground rule is that when the timer strikes, they're not allowed to touch the tower. And this is harder than it sounds, right? Because I run this exercise with lawyers and all sorts of creative professions, I had to factor in some additional rules, such as that the whole marshmallow has to be on the top, right? That we measure the tower from the base of the tower to the marshmallow, not from... Because I had a couple of teams try to suspend the marshmallow from the ceiling. This actually happened. It's creativity at its best, So, but you want to be very lean with the rules. And if you're looking for this experiment in its very essence, you can go online, Google Marshmallow Challenge, and the presentations and the run sheet and everything else will be there. And I'll also make sure to link it in the show notes for you so that you don't have to go far looking for it. So be very stingy with instruction, see how the group reacts, and then debrief it, see how they reacted to the rules, etc. In terms of teams competing, this is definitely one thing you want to facilitate. So one thing that I do very often is I approach a team and I say, oh, you guys are doing well, but the team over there are way ahead of you. I mean, their structure looks much better. So these are the things I just go around and keep telling people. But it's very important to come back to this moment during the debrief and ask people, how did you feel about me going around and, pointing fingers and doing that? So you can be the devil's advocate. You can be their best friend. So you can take the structure and do whatever you want with it. So I thought, when Michal asked this question, this immediately came to my mind. This is the one exercise that's my go-to that I like to share because it's deep, it's very universal, and it's extremely fun to run. And you never know what the outcome will be. And my advice is, when you run it for the first time, just take a note and see how tall the towers were. Just keep a good record of this exercise because you will want to run it over and over and over again. And you would probably like to see how different teams across different organizations compare.
So you said that's about a 45 minutes exercise that you have, and there's a little bit of preparation that you need to have in your secret envelope, space on the instructions. The outcome is here. Don't touch it, and then the quality or the value thereof is in the debrief. What are some of the debrief questions that you ask?
Well, I usually start with, how did it feel to be a part of the team, right? It's very important to ask the people that question so that they can unpack the big takeaways from the exercise, right? Another important question is, what was your role in this? So you can ask people one by one, going like, what part did you play? And more often than not, you will actually find that although the exercise is pretty much as abstract as you can imagine, because you're building a tower out of spaghetti. Come on, you're a professional wearing a suit, building a tower. This doesn't make sense. But very often people would create their own job description, if you will. So somebody would be a spaghetti cutter or a pipeline former, or I know, they all sorts of different names. So your role as a facilitator is, as you go around, is to first of all take pictures of this, because you need to come back to those as proof to show people what on earth they're doing, So you do that. You go around taking pictures and observing people take different roles. So I think this is a big part of unpacking the exercise. Like, what role did you play? How did that feel for you, right? But then I think the ultimate question of this exercise is how what you saw applies to your work.
Yeah.
Because people will see different things.
Yeah.
And so this exercise, in a way, is like a mirror of the whole organization, of the whole team. So, for example, people would come back with answers like, oh, I saw Loui take charge here, and, it was his plan, his idea, that's why he's failed. That's why we failed. So this is a pretty good outcome, right? Most successful teams, they will just keep bragging.
I must say, one of the times that I've been part of that little group doing a similar type of construction activity, the facilitator would go around and throw extra spanners into the wheel and go like, okay, fantastic. Participant number 3, you are now mute. You can't talk anymore. So, just kind of like, oh, but he was the leader. He was the one giving the instructions. And it's like, okay, great. And
awesome.
You can't talk anymore. And to see the power dynamic shift there. Or to midway through go like, okay, choose someone in your team to send to another team. And the dynamics there. Or just you go around, you go like, great, whoever I now identified in your team, you are now moving clockwise to the next team. And because that happens in our work environment, you're working in a team, but that's not your core team for the next 6 months. Guys come and go, guys get solicited to other activities, and something as simple as building a spaghetti structure creates this this reality that you don't want to share with. And many times that opens up new conversations. How did you feel being moved? I've been moved around this company so many times. I felt rejected. I had to find out what their plan was, and I felt that they didn't listen to me. And if you're a manager, hearing that with the guys that's on course with you, or in that training with you, there's a couple of alarm bells that actually goes off there. that you can unpack in different ways. But so that's just with team dynamics specifically taking into consideration.
Wow, I love this idea, but this is probably a bad sign. No, I'm kidding with you. This is actually a very good way of adding this extra spin on this exercise, right? So you probably want to, if we are talking about the importance of understanding who the people are with Mark, just in our previous episode, I think when you get that covered and you think, okay, they could use what we call in IT a chaos monkey, just going around annoying us, creating disturbances. That's a pretty good idea if you know the audience very well. And also, you need to be sure that you're not sort of layering difficulties on top of each other. So you don't want to be supportive here and then just rain chaos somewhere else. You really want to be consistent in your role here. Because although this exercise might sound like it's a hands-off exercise, you just let the timer go for 18 minutes, but you need to be extremely present when you're on this exercise. Well, all right, Loui, well, that gives us 2 tools that we shared. I think Mikhail will still be disappointed. You have one more to go?
I have one more to go.
Because
so the
I
third
do.
one
So, okay.
that I want to share is actually about threes, and we call it a triad. And one of the coaching and training methodologies that I've been exposed to actually uses the triad to really underline the learning. And now, what the basics of the triad is you have someone that is, if there's a skill. So many times if you're doing conflict resolution, if you're doing how to give feedback or appraisals, how to have a difficult conversation, many times just to give the theory is not necessarily enough. And what the triad is there to do is actually to give an opportunity to get into that role and go like, okay, let me practice this. So let's say it is Mikhail, it's Bartosz and Loui, and we form a triad. Now, one of us would take the role of I'm Loui, and Bartosz, you are going to be the person I'm practicing on, in inverted commas. So let me explain to you what the circumstances is that I would like to now role play. So Bartosz, you are my manager, and I need to have a conversation with you about, the fact that I don't appreciate it that you shout at me in the open office. So that's a difficult conversation I now need to have. So Bartosz, would you please play the role of my boss? He is like this and this and this. And I give you kind of guidelines about the character that you need to play. Now, Mikhail will be the third person, and he's just the observer. And we have about 7 minutes, and I, as Loui, have the opportunity in my own voice to try and, to practice the conversation I need to have with my manager. And when the 7 minutes is done, how far I even got into the conversation, the feedback then happens to say, okay, so Loui, how did you feel? The facilitator says, Loui, how did you feel? And the guy that did the role play says, well, I felt this and this, and then like, okay, so Bartosz, you as the receiving person that was playing a role of someone else, how did you experience Louis's approach and the way that he, verbalized, the way that he spoke, to give feedback to the guy doing the role play, saying, like, oh wow, so when I used that word, it was bad. Yes, okay, great. And then the third person observer gives feedback as a neutral outside person to say, you know what, maybe you could have done this differently, maybe you could have approached it in this way. So it really gives feedback to the person that's exercising that conversation that he needs to have from 2 points, from the recipient's point of view, as well as someone from the neutral outside. And what we've experienced is many times that just gives people the ability to hear themselves speak. And when I verbalize it for the first time, not just with my therapist on the couch and saying, I hate my boss, but to be able to practice that conversation, it gives them the vocabulary, it gives them the confidence to know, I've done this before, and, thank you, Bartosz, for playing a role of a really bad boss because you threw things my way that I can now anticipate going into my conversation that I need to have with my boss. So the triads is something that if there's a deep learning and if there's a interaction skill that needs to be had, that's an activity that I like to go towards, and that's about 5 minutes for the setup. So me explaining to Bartosz, who you need to be, and then about 10 minutes for the role play, and then about another 10 minutes just for the feedback from the three people. How did you feel? How did you feel? How did you feel? But that creates a place of safety, or it needs to be done in a place of safety, so that we can really start exercising and express ourselves.
Those triads exercise I had a pleasure of participating in, mostly during my coach training. But I think the world needs to hear about that, because sometimes we forget how important it is, first of all, to have an observer be a part of this conversation. Because I know we're role-playing that this person is invisible and they are not there, but oftentimes we find ourselves more conscious of the conversation we're having when we know there's someone listening to us. So it's already a lot of quality, but having someone present and sort of take notes. And I had the privilege of experiencing this sort of triad relationship many times in the course of my coach training. And I think it was instrumental to me being able to realize what I sound like, what I come across like. And sometimes it was the stuff that I wouldn't say it was nasty or was bad, it was dark. No, it was the sort of stuff that's really unexpected, and really having a triad in place helps it come out.
So that's the third one for me. Bartosz, anything else from your side, a trick of the trade that you would like to add?
Well, of course, I have many up my sleeve. And it's going to be so simple, I'm almost ashamed to describe it. But here goes. Bear with me. I call this exercise sticks. I know it's a very, very technical name. And it's all about priorities. Sometimes I use it as a little trick. I share it with people because I believe it's a very good personal effectiveness tool. And the reason I use it over and over again is because it helps me prioritize things very quickly. So let's imagine you have a group. And sooner or later, your group is going to end up with a list of action items to take away from your training, or a list of things to do, right? Or maybe, let's imagine, for the sake of this argument, that you don't have any training to run, you're listening to this show because you're a manager, and maybe you're in it for your own personal development. And people who are in it for the personal development, they have lists of things to do, to-do lists, lists of priorities. And in IT, famously, what usually happens to a software development team is the manager coming into the meeting and saying something like, guys, the priorities have changed. And if you're a careful listener, you've already heard that I use the word priorities, because that's what we like to have in IT or in project management in general. Yeah. Many priorities. And the plural here is not really compatible with our brains. And the same thing happens when your participants, they leave your training and they leave your workshop and they say, oh my, that was some really good training out there. We have a list of 15 things to do. And they end up not doing any of those because it's just too much. So you have 2 minutes and the time has just run out. Everybody is rushing to the airport, but you need to stop them and make sure they understand their priorities. So here's the exercise. List all the things that you need to weigh against each other on a flip chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say there's 5 items over there. You have those 5 items on the flip chart, and you take the first item and you weigh it against the second item. So would you like to do A or would you rather do B? And you give people a binary choice.
As a matter of priority, saying what is more important for us.
Exactly.
In our group, it's more important to do number 1 or number 2.
Yes, but you never weigh more than 2 things at the same time. So this is where the math comes in. So, okay. So you and people say, oh, they can vote. So if you're doing this on your own, you decide. But if you're doing this in a group, people can vote. So 6 people voted on item number 1. And you place a little tick. I call them sticks. Put a little stick right next to it. Draw it.
A vertical line downwards, yes?
And then you proceed to ask them, would you rather do item number 1 or item number 3? And whatever they choose, again, put a nice stick right next to it. Item number 1 or item number 3, 4, 5, etc., etc. And when you're done comparing the first item to everything else on the list, you go down to item number 2, item number 2, item number 3, item number 2, item number 4, etc., etc. You get the picture. So the first 2 rounds are usually long because people are still sort of fighting with priorities. But by the time you're in round 3 and you're comparing the third item, it goes like a breeze. And what you end up with is an image where next to every item on this backlog, on this to-do list, you have a number of sticks. They say there's 7 sticks here. 4 sticks here, 3 sticks here. So these are your priorities. So which one are you going to do first? And everybody knows exactly where they're going. I've used this tool before in coaching. It was extremely liberating to some of my clients. And I suspect the reason why it was so powerful and liberating is because it doesn't get any simpler than that. It is extremely easy to follow, extremely easy to facilitate, and it can have tremendous impact on your audience. So for all of you out there listening for a reliable tool that always delivers a clear list of priorities, this is my go-to tool.
Bartosz, thank you so much for that. I think just in summary, what we discussed today, some of the tools and the tips that we had a discussion on today was the use of a clock in the beginning to set up meetings with various people within the group to really get them interacting with one another and asking either questions relevant to the content or, silly questions just to get them to share with one another. The second one that we spoke about was the spaghetti and the Marshmallow Tower and the Eiffel Towers and all the big things that people can build. It's a 45 minutes exercise that you described, and just some of the learnings that come from debriefing that situation with one another. I spoke about the triads, and I know that this is one of your passion points, is to get to the point of learning by doing, and also having a neutral outside person reflect and give you feedback on the conversations that you just had. And finally, you closed with the conversation that you call sticks, that is just there to discuss and to identify the main priority. After this training and the session that we had, we as a team, what have we decided we need to focus on, and to really have clarity on the one or the two things that we need to accomplish in the next couple of weeks to really take the training and to make it more applicable. So, Mikhail, thank you so much for your question. Bartosz, if someone else has got a question, how do they get in contact with us and how do they approach us?
Well, it's actually very easy. You can check the show notes to find our email address, which is ask@amazingmeetings.org. That's ask@amazingmeetings.org. Just drop us the line. We'd be happy to answer the question on air between the two of us and maybe with the expert in the room. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm really looking forward to having you in our next episode of Amazing Meetings.